Pacific Gyre, or the Pacific Garbage Patch, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we talk about the tsunami debris. This is an international issue. This is a slide of Midway Atoll, and you can even see as a place as remote as Midway Atoll, which is the northwestern tip of the Hawaiian Islands, you've got a lot of marine debris in the albatross nesting areas. So again, Mr. Blumenfeld charged us with seeing what we could do about this issue as far as EPA Region 9 is concerned. And we formed a multi-divisional strategy. This is a schematic of that strategy. So it includes our waste division, our water division, and our Superfund division, and in the center, our outreach and partnering. And we like to think of this as analogous to what we call the four-step universal response model. So I would ask you to just keep thinking about this schematic as I talk about this response model. And again, I think in terms of the response model, I'm preaching to the choir a little bit because this is something that's taught at the California Specialized Institute. This is at a fire scope. I mean, this is sort of basic stuff that we all learn and drill in terms of how we respond to an incident. It doesn't matter if it's a pipeline spill, a tank car release, if there's a vessel that needs lightering, if, for example, we're cleaning up residential yards from a lead smelter that's depositing lead from fallout. We do it the same way. We have notification, we have source control, we try to effectively contain, and then we clean up. And the approach that we're taking in our marine debris program mimics, is analogous to those steps. And I'm going to sort of step through them and try to explain a little bit what we're doing. So in terms of source control, which is the first step, up to 80% of the marine debris comes from land-based sources. A third of those land-based marine debris is packaging. Things when you go to a big box store and you buy that new appliance, you get all this packaging. A third of that land-based packaging, a third of the marine debris is packaging. 33 million tons of the packaging to landfills every year. And as you know, cities spend millions managing that litter. So what we've tried to do in our waste division is to try to get at that source and reduce it. Walmart, and we believe that if we can reduce that source, then that will correlate to a reduction ultimately in the amount of trash that's reaching the oceans. Now, Walmart has committed to reducing their packaging by 5% by 2013. Now, 5% may not sound like that much in terms of a reduction, but believe it or not, that will translate to $3.4 billion of savings. That's billion with a B. B as in boy. 200,000 trucks off the road, reduction in fuel, reduction in road wear and tear. I mean, there's all sorts of ancillary benefits that occur. 660,000 tons of CO2 emission reductions as well. So there are significant benefits to the source control, the reduction piece of this. And in California, of course, California being on the forefront of these efforts, many municipalities are starting to control, for example, plastic bags and styrofoam use. And we would encourage that sort of activity in the future. Again, just the schematic showing some of the ways that this happens. An iPhone packaging from 2007 versus more recently, anything that we can do to reduce the amount of packaging that ends up going to landfills, but inevitably there's some spillage and leakage from that. The next step is the prevention piece. Again, several metropolitan areas in California have been leaders in using Clean Water Act tools to control trash in watersheds. I'm going to try to go easy on the acronyms, but you may have heard of the 303D list, a list of impaired waterways that is included as a Clean Water Act requirement. The other thing is a total maximum daily load, or TMDL. You may have heard that acronym. as a way of controlling the amount of loading that goes into our surface waters. For the LA River, for example, the Regional Water Quality Control Board has established a trash TMDL for the LA River with a goal of zero trash by 2016. In the Bay Area, they have taken a slightly different tact. They've kind of skipped the TMDL process completely because that can be somewhat time-consuming, and they've gone directly to a municipal separate storm sewer system, or MS4 permit condition, for the surface waters that are covered in the Bay Area, with again a zero trash target to surface water by 2022. Here's just a photo of an inlet screen that is catching some of this debris before it gets into the storm sewer system and eventually out to the ocean. Unfortunately, a lot of these things are driven by revenue. Is there revenue to do this trash management? Everybody knows we're in some pretty tough economic times. And so as you can see, the progress is somewhat correlated to the amount of money that some of these communities have. Just a schematic from Southern California, the blue showing the progress, the red showing areas that still need some work. California, on a statewide basis, is proposing trash control policy that may apply to MS4s statewide. So you'd have these permit conditions with zero trash loading targets statewide. And again, we encourage the state to continue with those efforts. I'm sure they're going to be somewhat controversial, but we do believe that this is something that all communities need to be focused on to some extent. And the final piece of the four-step model is the cleanup piece. So the plastic, when it hits the ocean, breaks down into these very small pieces. We refer to them as microplastic. And believe it or not, they act as a sponge and they begin to absorb the persistent organic pollutants that are in the ambient seawater. As you can see in this photo here, pieces of microplastic in a jar, and the plastic absorbs these things at thousands of times the concentration in the ambient seawater. Persistent organic pollutants such as DDT, PCBs, and other things. The photo over here shows zooplankton that are actually ingesting those microplastic pieces. And we found these things in jellyfish, and we believe that they're accumulating in the food chain. And if the chemicals that are associated with these microplastics accumulate enough, we believe they could represent a threat to the environment and human health. So what we're doing is currently conducting some fish tissue studies, both in the laboratory and from fish that were taken from the Pacific, the eastern part of the Pacific Gyre, to see if we can make this link and build this case between ingestion of the microplastic and an accumulation of these POPs in the food chain. Now, the data are just coming in. This is very preliminary work. There is some literature out there that suggests that this is occurring. And if we can validate our data and make a pretty good case for this, we think that we might be in a position, and of course I should add, overcome some pretty significant jurisdictional hurdles in terms of who's responsible for plastic floating around in the middle of the ocean. I think we could make a case that we might apply some of the federal environmental statutes, such as CERCLA, to this effort. And that really is our intent. I mean, that essentially is what Jared Blumenfeld has been asking us to do. So we'll see how that goes, and we'll keep you posted on that. So now I want to move to the tsunami debris. And again, we all know what happened last year. Talk about an unbelievable tragedy, the earthquake and the tsunami, and then on top of that, the nuclear incident with the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plants was just an unbelievable one-two punch to Japan. They'll be recovering from that for years. So the tsunami, as you know, resulted in millions of tons of material washing into the ocean. Nobody quite knows the total volume. We've heard estimates as high as 25 million tons. The debris field was initially visible on satellite imagery, but as it broke up into the ocean and started moving across the Pacific, we lost contact with in terms of satellite imagery, and we're having to rely on some of the models. This just shows a schematic of the larger ocean currents that occur in the Pacific. Here's the Hawaiian archipelago here. Midway is about up at that point out there, that corner. And we believe that what's happening is this debris field is coming across, and it may be tipping up and may be wrapping down. We're not quite sure. Again, it's difficult to see on satellites. We're relying on models. Here's a NOAA model that shows sort of a projection through 2015. The red being 2011, the orange 2012, yellow 2013, violet 2014, or blue 2014, and violet 2015. Again, highly uncertain in terms of where this debris will end up. You've probably all seen some of the recent media reports about buoys washing up and people getting all agitated about whether it really is Japan debris or not. And we'll get into that in a minute. Another model from the University of Hawaii, some folks that we've been working with, showing their projections about how the debris might move. So EPA, being the good bureaucracy that we are, what do we do when we're presented with a problem? We form an interagency work group. I mean, what else do we do? So we've tried to bring together the people, I like to call it the people with a dog in the fight. And clearly, these issues start at the local level and they move up through the state, but there are federal entities such as NOAA, the Navy, the Coast Guard, EPA, other federal agencies that have an interest in this. There's work going on in University of Hawaii, the International Pacific Research Center there. A lot of oceanographers very, very interested in this, in just what's going to happen to this debris, where is it going, how is it moving, et cetera. So some of the things we've been doing are we've set up, for example, a regular monitoring program with the US Fish and Wildlife Service, who are out on Midway, to check with them every week or every 2 weeks to see if there's any unusual spike in debris that they're seeing wash up on Midway, because that could be kind of an early warning that there may be some activity in terms of the tsunami debris. We've recently partnered with some of our other federal agencies to conduct an overflight in the monument area in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands to actually put eyes on the water. We didn't see anything. It's sort of like looking for a needle in the haystack, but we do believe that if we can do some more observations and maybe get a better handle on where this debris may be, if we can have some sightings and get some better data in terms of what's going on out there, we're going to be in a better position or the predictive models will be a little bit better. And again, it's kind of tough flying over the ocean and looking for debris, but if we could partner up with a training mission, for example, as long as people need the flight hours, why not tag this onto it? We think that would be a good partnering effort with some of our other federal partners. We've also worked with NOAA in terms of sending out a marine advisory to ask ships that encounter debris to report the position and type to, I believe it's a NOAA website, so that we can, again, get a better handle on what may be happening out there. So again, the estimates that are they're based on models. There's a lot of uncertainty that's associated with the models because of the various parameters that have to be factored in terms of how the debris will move. But that's the best we can do. And again, working with people and making sure we gather as much hard information as possible, we're going to do the best that we can. So that sort of brings us to the kind of questions that we want to answer or try to answer. And also, I think, very important piece of this discussion today is the public messaging. We want to make sure that the people, the environmental health officials, the public health officials, anybody that's going to get questions from the public about this issue has a good message, and we're all in sync. It's kind of a mini JIC, I guess, in a way, in terms of what we should be telling people. And so we're fortunate in California that there are very well-trained people at the county and the regional level that are in a good position to, in fact, have been dealing with marine debris for years. And I know there's some representatives from the Coastal Commission here that may have some thoughts on this, from NOAA and others. But I think, in a nutshell, our message has been, there's a couple of threads of the message. First of all, marine debris is washing up all the time. It may or may not be associated with the tsunami. The best predictions we've heard are that debris associated with the tsunami is unlikely to show up, if it does at all, until 2013. And so, so that if there is an unusual spike or unusual materials that start washing up, if a drum washes up that's got Japanese lettering on it, sure, we would want to be informed about that, and there should be some communication about that. But the normal marine debris that comes in any storm surge should be dealt with as it's always dealt with. It's highly unlikely that there's going to be any radioactivity or other hazardous materials associated with the tsunami debris. It's possible, but it's highly unlikely. It's a big ocean. The material is traveling a long way. However, that being said, one can't be too cautious, and if, again, unusual material starts washing up, it probably should be screened. The local people that do this thing on a routine basis are probably in a position to do that sort of screening. If, again, if there's a spike, if there's suddenly waves and waves of unusual marine debris that starts washing up in the course of a winter storm event, there are federal agencies that can be brought in to assist in the assessment and the cleanup.
Can you define screening?
When I say screening, I mean the typical screening that anybody, any hazmat unit would do when they encounter an unknown. Radiation, toxic volatiles, sort of the basic. If you come up to a drum and you don't know what it is, there are certain steps that a hazmat unit would go through in terms of assessment. And actually, there's a couple of folks in here that could get into a lot greater detail if we wanted to get into the specific steps that we would recommend in terms of a screening. So I think that pretty well wraps up what I wanted to talk about this morning about marine debris. I'm hoping there are some questions or we could have some dialogue. I want to introduce Anna Marie Cook. If you could stand up, Anna Marie. Anna Marie Cook is one of our senior staff folks in the Superfund division. She's been sort of leading the charge on the marine debris issue. She's the leader of our team at Region 9. A couple other people I have here, Bill Robertson, Rich Martin, and Harry Allen. And then John Kennedy over here somewhere. Again, all have been involved in the marine debris effort to some extent. So again, I want to thank you very much for the time this morning. I really appreciate the ability to do this outreach to our partners, and I guess we'll throw it open for questions. Don?
On the agenda, we had Anna Marie talking about some health risk assessments and some other things. Is that to follow yet, or?
We could do, sure.
Yeah.
Or we could, maybe we should take questions if there are any questions that have come in. And then we want to get to the messaging piece as well. Yes, sir. Could you identify yourself and then name and agency and then question?
I just wanted to know, Region 9 covers what states, or does it include Oregon, Washington?
Yes. So EPA Region 9 covers California, Arizona, Nevada, Hawaii, and the Pacific Island territories of Guam, the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, and American Samoa. Region 10 covers Washington, Oregon, Alaska are the coastal areas of Region 10, and Idaho. Yes, in the back. You got the mic?
Hi, Deborah Hoffman with Cal EPA. You mentioned the year 2013 as the first time we might see debris. Is that in Hawaii area or in California?
No, that's actually the mainland coast of the
Okay.
U.S. Again, the model, there's a certain amount of uncertainty in the models. We've heard predictions for the Hawaiian Islands as early as this year. The most recent information that we've seen indicates that the debris may be trending north and east of the Hawaiian archipelago there, so it may miss the Hawaiian Islands and kind of whip around and either impact Alaska or the mainland, or not at all. I mean, that's another thing that we all need to remember. This may be much ado about nothing in terms of sort of massive impacts to the coastline, but I felt, and I think we all felt, that it's better to do some pre-planning and be ready. I'd rather overreact to this initially and be ready and have talked to our partners in the states so that if something happens, we don't have to scramble around and try to concoct our message when the questions from the media. But 2013 is what we.
Hi, Melinda Stair, Cal EMA debris specialist. I've been going out doing a lot of training, especially Southern California, and I'm getting calls on, is it coming? What are we going to do? Have you addressed any funding issues for this? Because that's their main concern. They're asking since, and I know I'm going to put you on the spot, Mr. Calical, with FEMA. They're asking, since it is part of the presidentially declared tsunami event, if funding would be available based on that, or if you've even addressed any funding issues, because that's pretty much what the locals are worried about, is if it comes, if it's a lot, what help can, I mean, I know they can talk to you, but like you said, jurisdictional issues, with Coast Guard, Army Corps, and everybody else. If you guys have even thought about that yet.
I can try to address that, and then I might ask our colleagues from FEMA to talk about that. There's a couple of different things. And I think on the funding side, I can only speak for US EPA. If there is a threat to human health and the environment that crosses a certain threshold, a legal threshold that we have, we can use CERCLA funds, a Superfund money for cleanup. But it has to cross that threshold. I can't use the money at my disposal to clean up solid waste, municipal waste. If it's hazardous waste that represents a threat to human health, yes, I can, but I have to argue with my attorney about whether it meets that legal standard or not, because unfortunately, I have a management chain above me that's scared to death about everybody coming to us for money to clean up solid waste, basically using Superfund money. That being said, we're certainly willing to, and we have in the past, push the envelope in situations that are a bona fide threat. In terms of whether the state would like to make a formal request to FEMA through the normal channels in terms of providing funding that asking FEMA to provide funding, I mean, that's another option. And again, I would ask FEMA to speak to that.
There's a couple of parallel principles that you've already touched upon, and that would be the threshold where it gets to the point where we're looking at a very serious situation. FEMA has something similar to that. Federal Emergency Management Agency has terminology that we usually use when we're doing what we call a preliminary damage assessment. And the two concepts that we look at is, one is the severity, and then the other one is the magnitude. And when we talk about severity, we're talking about probably more like an acute event, something where a whole bunch of debris sweeps up, within let's say days, very short time period, to the point where it may overwhelm the local authorities. That would be an example of severity. An example of the magnitude would be like if, say, we're looking at the Northern California coast from Eureka all the way down to LA. I mean, that would be a large magnitude. And then when you combine both concepts, then that could be a recipe for a possible request, you know, for assistance. Now, when we look at that, then we also look at the impact. You know, is it still capable? Is the state still capable of being able to deal with it? And again, it goes back to whether the severity and the magnitude warrants that. So, and then the other thing we'll look at is immediate threat. We don't necessarily take a look at hazards to navigation because usually other federal authorities, such as the Coast Guard, normally handles that. When we had the tsunami last year, a lot of the cleanup was done, you know, oil spills in the harbor, for example. FEMA did not cover that because we had a lot of efforts that were done by the Coast Guard under their own authority. And however, things like boats that were smashed up against the docks, a good example would be the Santa Cruz Harbor Port District actually had to remove those boats, and under an emergency response, we were able to pick up the cost of that. FEMA does. So there's a lot of things that we have to take a look at. Now, the opposite situation would be that if it's a very slow-moving event, meaning that you're talking about dribbles, pieces, you know, bits and pieces of debris, going back to what you said about much ado about nothing, then maybe perhaps it is still within the capabilities, and maybe it may not lead to, you know, a federal declaration. One more thing, it was mentioned about whether this is still tsunami. We closed the tsunami incident, so there is no open funding based on the original tsunami event. It's a closed event, so this would be a completely new situation, and so it would have to have a separate declaration, separate procedures to go through in order to get that.
Alan from EPA's Emergency Response Program. I work for Dan, and I'm part of the Marine Debris team with Anna Marie. And yeah, I just wanted to echo those comments. I don't anticipate tsunami debris rising to the level of a FEMA disaster declaration. I mean, even during the tsunami, when the actual wave hit California, as you just pointed out, it was the federal and state and local authorities that handled the debris resulting from that. In Hawaii, it was even local volunteers that handled a significant amount of debris. So that kind of raised a red flag that, you know, the federal and state and local authorities really ought to be working on this were it to come ashore. And you can imagine debris, even though it's coming a long distance, still is potentially contaminated. It's maybe analogous to a household hazardous waste circumstance after a disaster, where every debris source has some, you know, hazardous substance component. So I guess the closest analogy we have to a response to debris is the recent work with Cal Recycle. So if you don't know, Cal Recycle is probably on their 5th now Delta Ocean debris cleanup. And one of those areas was in EPA's zone. They asked us for their support, and we wound up working with them to remove 12 vessels, sunken vessels. Rich Martin here was the OSC on that. That's our on-scene coordinator. And in that case, we were able to define the hazardous portion of that debris. And so we used our circular authority in collaboration with Cal Recycle to complete the mission of removing all the debris. And so I think you'd imagine something like that happening on the coast, but the key about the coast is that the Corps of Engineers is really the debris management authority in that case. And if they're not tasked by FEMA, they are going to have a different opinion maybe about whether they're going to spend money on debris removal. And then, of course, Coast Guard does the CERCLA and hazmat and oil authority for the ocean and bay and most of the delta, so the same situation there. So that's why this issue really requires a lot of federal coordination, but also coordination with the state and local agencies.
Hi.
Yes, sir.
I'm Eben Schwartz. I'm with the California Coastal Commission. I run marine debris programs for the commission, which include the California Coastal Cleanup Day and the Adopt a Beach programs, which is our state's largest volunteer events, and they are debris cleanups. I'd like to throw a new wrinkle into this discussion here because when it sounds like when we're talking about debris from the Superfund FEMA Cal Recycle standpoint, we're talking about really large items that require a much greater effort to remove. But what I think we'll most likely be seeing from the tsunami debris is a greater abundance of a lot of smaller stuff, a lot more plastic, a lot more lumber that's going to be washing up on the state's beaches. And in that case, it's going to come down to our state's volunteers to actually remove that stuff, the folks that are out there year-round doing beach cleanups and taking care of our state's beaches on behalf of the landowners and the state, just out of the goodness of their heart. There is going to be a need to increase capacity on that front in the coming years, because if there is a greater abundance of debris, these programs are running at a bare bones limit right now, and it's difficult, at the very least, to generate the number of volunteers that we're going to need to remove the amount of stuff that might, in fact, be making landfall on the coast. So I think as we continue the discussion this morning, I think we need to consider ways that we can draw much closer connections between local emergency management and the volunteer groups that are actually doing the debris removal all year round, because there could be opportunities to increase capacity at a local level and also at a state level as we try to form a better partnership between the folks that are actually doing the removal and the folks that are overseeing the hazardous stuff.
Yeah, for EPA, we'd welcome the opportunity to be a part of that. Again, just one point I would reemphasize is, for us, it's not so much size as lethality or the hazard, how hazardous is the material. That's really where we're going to be at, we're going to see whether we cross the line, whether we can actually use our resources to bring to bear.
And Dan, my question has, this is Don Johnson with Cal EPA. My question has to do with that. You used the word unusual debris to be screened. So what I'm thinking is, how do we make that determination that every time somebody finds some piece of debris that maybe they think they hadn't seen before on the thing, that they're not calling out a hazmat team? So have you thought through, do you have some screening criteria, something? Have you looked at this stuff enough that you could give some direction to local programs as to how they would go about identifying or telling the public what's unusual and would require this closer evaluation?
I might look to one of my colleagues here. I might punt that over there. I think in general, it's kind of a professional judgment kind of thing, where if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck kind of approach, but that may be too simplistic. But when I think, because like some of the press reports that we saw recently coming out of Washington, where a buoy floated up with some Japanese lettering on it or some indication that it could be of Japanese origin, well, and then immediately the conclusion was reached, or somebody leapt to the conclusion that it was from the tsunami, as opposed to, well, maybe a fishing vessel lost a buoy that had been manufactured in Japan. You'd have to do some good forensics to make the case that that is actually tsunami related, as opposed to just the ambient debris that's floating out there in the ocean and may have gotten washed up. But again, I don't know if we've given this some thought. I'd ask Harry or Rich if they had any thoughts on that, in terms of how what sort of advice one might give in terms of, but I don't know if we've kind of thought that through, Don, to be frank.
Okay, is this on? No, I think you approach it in any way that you see any kind of material that's in and around your shorelines that looks suspicious. It's an unknown. And it's really first responder awareness is what you're looking at. You have to go through a series really thought processes, like Dan was saying. It's an investigation. What is it? What does it look like? Where it could possibly be from? And this is not something for normal people to be, tasked to do as volunteers in a cleanup. I mean, we saw this at Costco Busan, where there was an issue with health and safety. So the health and safety issue about this issue, once it's been vetted as an unknown, becomes a serious issue for everybody who responds to this. So, I mean, that's my perspective on it. It's an assessment, the very basic way of doing an assessment. It's looking at it. It's not touching it. It's looking at it. Calling in people with some experience who have dealt with debris, coastal debris, marine waste, and try to get a feeling on what it is. The Petaluma cleanup that we did, and the work I've been doing with Todd Thalhammer with Cal Recycle, has shown that there's a lot of hazards with this stuff. There's heavy metals, there's radiation, there's mercury, there's just a litany of things, PCBs. So it's really going to come down to having some people with some qualifications and some knowledge and some training to put eyes on this material and then make that decision process work from there.
Dan, mind if I make a comment? Bill Robertson, I'm also with EPA. Following the debris overflight we did on January 17 and 18 out of Northwest Hawaiian Islands, NOAA sponsored a very broad contingency planning conference. It included state, federal, local agencies for the Hawaiian Islands, and that contingency planning, I would urge the state of California and even our brethren up in Oregon and Washington to do a similar thing, to bring everyone together, take a look at how you do want to identify and then assess any potential things. What kind of a phone or a notification network would you like for both near shore and in the terrestrial zone on the shorelines? And we haven't received the summary of all that work, but once we do receive it, Don, we'll be sharing it with you. And I think there's a lot to learn and perhaps put together your own protocol.
Bob Bouchard, Cal EMA. I'd like to piggyback on the Colonel's comments, and I have a question for EPA. Are we forming up in 2013 a form of a unified command involving the federal level, state level, and the local level, something like we do with the Coast Guard for oil spill responses?
For this issue?
Yeah, if it escalates or picks up and there's a need for it, do you see bringing everybody together under one roof as a unified command structure?
I would say that if the state of California would like to invite us into the unified command, that we'd love to be partners. But I don't know if I don't know. I can't stand here and look you in the eye and say that EPA would initiate that. That seems to me if the activity picks up and this really looks like it's becoming an issue, the various people from the various agencies, I think, yeah, I guess the short answer is yes, but I think we would have to talk about who would be kind of the lead dog in that UC. And I am guessing that the state of California would want to be, but I may be wrong.
Thank you, sir.
Dan, Steve Sellers, Cal EMA Operations. We've been aware of this. We were very encouraged by the presentation. I appreciate Don Johnson's help in putting this together. I've charged my operations team with putting together a ConOps. So we've had some initial questions from some of our local governments, obviously. We have a little bit of time window, which is very encouraging because we often don't have that. But we also don't want this to become our white powder incidents like we've had before for the terrorism response. So I have charged my team with putting that together. And we are going to reach out to our partners, and we wanted to get more questions today to find out how to shape that. So this is kind of a learning process for us as well today, and we appreciate all the input. We will be reaching out to our local and state counterparts, our stakeholders and partners, and obviously you guys at the federal level, to vet that, to make sure we're all on the same page. And also to include the public messaging, which I think you've mentioned earlier is going to be really keenly important. So we are going to be shaping that up. So we just want to kind of make everybody aware that if there is any input, we're going to be more than happy to hear that from you so we can do this as more effectively as possible.
Well, thanks, Steve. And again, US EPA would be very interested in participating in that with California.
Hi, Bob Gerber with the Cal EMA Law Enforcement Division. I manage the Coroner's Mutual Aid and Mass Fatality Program. This hit our radar screen back in October, and we had some inquiries from state and local government with regard to the potential for human remains to be a part of the debris. With that, we sent out a bulletin to all our allied law enforcement agencies around the state, making them aware of the potential for debris washing ashore in 2013 and 2014, and also with the potential for human remains to be in the vessels or containers that may wash ashore. And with that, having those folks or those responding agencies notify their local coroner's office or medical examiner or sheriff coroner along the coast. We've published it. We also have it on our website if anybody's interested.
Thank you.
Kind of this is Don Johnson again with Cal EPA. Follow-on question. What research has US EPA or NOAA or the Coast Guard done on either directly sampling the debris flow for radioactive materials or hazardous materials out there, or what modeling has been done regarding the release of any radioactive materials and what the decay rates might be and the time frames that we're talking about? Because I think you have access to information. I mean, we don't reach all the way to Japan internationally to get information on exactly the events and what was released and what's known there. And of course, we don't have a Navy, so we're not out there sampling this. So we really have to rely on that information from the federal government so we can start making these decisions. If we don't have that information, then our only other alternative is we got to wait until this stuff washes up on the shore and then start some assessment process from there until we learn and feel comfortable about what we're dealing with. But it'd be nice if we had some, some pretty good, estimations, at least some health physicists that have worked on this, and we knew what the releases were and what might be encountered.
Yeah. I'm not aware of any modeling or measurements that have been made of debris at this point, but that is something that I could take back and talk to our health physics people about. What I've heard, and it's more anecdotal, is that it's highly unlikely that the debris coming from Japan would be contaminated in terms of radiation. One reason is that the tsunami washed, the majority of the debris that washed out, I think, preceded the nuclear incident and the fallout that might have, and the attempts to cool down the reactor and all the runoff, the contaminated runoff, so that there may not be that much material that was in that initial outwash into the ocean because, that contamination, the radiation incident occurred after. But that being said, it's certainly, there may have been fallout. I mean, I just don't know, Don, and I think that's a question that we could ask people that may have better knowledge.
My guess too, but that's just a guess.
Yeah.
Until I have more definitive.
Yeah, and again, I think Jordan Stout has a thought on that. One other thing is, and this we saw in Fukushima as well, in the absence of information, the speculation will run wild. And so for me, my sort of simplistic approach is it's better to screen it and be able to say, no, we didn't find anything, as opposed to not taking a measurement to be able to definitively say, you know what, we checked that. And in fact, there was no radiation contamination that we found, because in absence of that, people are just going to imagine things, the rumor mill starts running, and then we've lost the public messaging battle, basically. What, Jordan, did you have a thought?
I actually have several thoughts.
Could you give Jordan the mic? This is Jordan Stout from NOAA.
I'm Jordan Stout from NOAA's Office of Response and Restoration. Within the Office of Response and Restoration, I believe it's on. Can you guys hear me okay? Within NOAA's Office of Response and Restoration is NOAA's Marine Debris Program, which has been around for close to 10 years. I'm not sure exactly because it started before I got to NOAA. But we've been heavily involved in this issue from the beginning. So there's a couple of things which I'd like to touch on. The trajectory modeling efforts, for one. NOAA and the University of Hawaii, as Dan had mentioned, had worked on trajectory estimates, drift estimates for
tsunami debris that went into the Pacific Ocean. Those initial models were based on sort of typical surface currents for the Pacific Ocean. As you can expect, it's difficult to predict what ocean currents are going to be doing a week, months, or years in the future. So it's really just a rough estimate. As we accumulate more observations of actual debris out in the Pacific, we'll be able to update a lot of those modeling efforts and do what we call a hindcast model, where we actually include actual currents and actual item observations to update those models and hopefully give a better prediction of when items, if they are going to appear, will appear, and what the nature of those items are. Also, as Dan mentioned, early on in the first month or so, after the initial earthquake, there was relatively large rafts of debris that were visible by satellite that quickly dispersed or sank or spread out to the point where it was no longer visible by satellite. There have only been visual observations since then, either by aircraft or by vessels. And as time has gone on, those observations, vessel and aircraft-based observations, have become fewer and further between. So NOAA has been collecting information from voluntary vessel reports from commercial ships. We have starting to get some information from the Japanese government that they are tracking some of that debris as well. And so a lot of that information can be fed into future trajectory modeling efforts and so on and so forth. But at this point, it's getting harder and harder to even observe individual targets at this point, let alone sample them. There's only been there has not been any verified tsunami debris that has hit U.S. shorelines at this point, based on a conference call we had last week with our folks that are throughout the Pacific Basin. There has only been as far as I know, there's only been 2 items out in the open ocean that have been conclusively linked back to the tsunami, to Japan itself. 2 vessels that were registered to the Fukushima prefecture. One was observed by a Coast Guard vessel, another was observed and picked up by a Russian research vessel. That is, to my knowledge, that's the only item that has been scanned for radiation, and it was found to be similar to background levels. So when we get to the radiation question, our NOAA folks had worked with a lot of folks in the CDC, EPA, and the state of Washington's radiological teams to look at this question of radiation potential, and we feel it's very unlikely that any of the marine debris is going to have any significant radiation signal. The inundation area of Japan was well over 200 square miles. The Fukushima Daiichi's plant is from a single location. In many cases, a lot of the debris that washed into the Pacific Ocean originated far, far away from the plant itself. The debris was also many miles offshore at the time of the release from the plant, and it's been rained on and washed over with waves and such. And so there's a lot of reasons why people believe that there's not likely to be much significant radiation carried by this debris. So.
But that isn't a comforting message, because it's not.
Right. The real answer is going to come from sampling, but as I said, that
because unless we can, we don't have infinite resources to go out and sample every piece of plastic that somebody reports, so we have to.
Right, and at this point, we're having difficulty even observing stuff, let alone collecting and sampling it. So.
My name is Rick Wilson. I'm with the California Geological Survey, and I work very closely with Cal EMA. Kevin Miller here to my right. He's the head of the Tsunami program at Cal EMA, and we have a steering committee that has a bunch of constituents along the coast, 20 counties, state parks. John Polonio here over to my left here is a representative. We work with Coastal Commission. We are getting a lot of questions about this. It's not tsunami related to California's coast, but it definitely is tsunami related, so that's where we get our questions from. And I'm very glad that this is being held and that the EPA from both the state and federal agencies are getting involved here. we make a lot of presentations with the March 11th anniversary coming up, and the end of March is Tsunami Preparedness Week, National Tsunami Preparedness Week. We're going to be making dozens of presentations in the next couple of months. Our counties are going to be making presentations. And I know that on the list of things to talk about here is public messaging, and I can't stress enough that it would be really beneficial for this group or somebody here to come up with an official federal talking points that would be available, and possibly a set of slides that we could use if we get questions during our public presentations. It's really where the rubber meets the road, and I think a lot of our constituents have been asking for that. And also, I know that may be talked about later, so I'll kind of put that off. But also, if you get questions about tsunamis, like we've gotten questions about the debris, we have a website, www.tsunami.ca.gov, or you can send them we can provide our information about a tsunami, because we do face a similar threat along our north coast as Japan does. So it's something that we're very concerned with, and if you do get the tsunami question, we can try to help you with that.
That's great. You know, I think that's a great opportunity for us to partner up with you guys. If I'm not mistaken, NOAA has got a pretty good set of frequently asked question information that we could make available, and we could certainly come up with a set of slides, I think. So maybe we could exchange information after, and we can follow up on that. And that would be a good opportunity as a way of reaching out to those coastal communities. Absolutely.
Hey, Dan. I'm Jordan Scott with Cal EMA. I'm just receiving a few questions from the folks watching this online. So we'll go through those. Hopefully they're fairly quick. The first one comes from Kathleen Sloan, the director of the Yurok Tribe Environmental Program. And she would like to know, can a tribe use GAP or solid waste or Brownsfield CERCLA funding to respond to tsunami debris if it washes up on reservation lands and estuaries? And that was a question for EPA Region 9. And I'm not sure of the answer, but we could definitely get her an answer. I'm not sure about Brownfield's money, GAP money. Well, Harry, you have a thought on that?
Yeah, so Brownfield's money is dedicated for redeveloping contaminated sites, so that wouldn't apply in this case. But on the other hand, if there was a significant enough source and that happened to be contaminated or potentially contaminated, yeah, the GAP money would be appropriate to use if that were the case. But in those situations, we'd also consider responding. So they should just call the emergency response section if that were to happen.
Okay, thank you for that. The next one comes from Nick Vent with San Diego County Hazmat, and he would like to know if EPA will be providing specific guidance on types of detection equipment the Hazmat team should use, and what SOPs and levels are the concern.
Tell Nick, forget about it.
Nick, forget about it, buddy.
No, absolutely. We'd be happy. I mean, actually, as Nick... as he knows, those guys are very well placed to, they've got a great program down there, but we'd be happy to talk to them about the types of equipment that we would use in terms of doing an initial assessment. And I'll have one of our OSCs get in touch with him about that. Absolutely.
George Roddy, Cal EMA. Bob Gerber's question or statement regarding the corners is interesting, and it raises some posthumous repatriation issues that would engage the U.S. Department of State. So I don't know if there's anybody here from U.S. Department of State, but there are 2 representatives in California that should be part of our planning and also messaging in the future regarding this topic.
Yeah, and in fact, from the Coast Guard, we have Captain Art Snyder up here in the front. Art and I co-chair the regional response team for this area, which is 15 federal agencies. Department of State is one of them. if this issue does come up, clearly we would be able to reach out through our RRT State Department member. And again, not to be cavalier or callous about this, because obviously it's a very serious issue, but certainly a body part attached to a Nike sneaker, for example, would qualify as unusual debris in my mind, and clearly would demand notification and sort of special treatment. I mean, that is the sort of thing that we're talking about when we say unusual material.
And with emphasis on special treatment, because I know the coroners and medical examiners around the state treat all human remains with dignity and respect. And I can't imagine if we were to pick up a pile of debris or screen the debris with, heavy equipment and it happens to be human remains in there. What kind of signal do we send to the people of Japan and how we, handle their loved ones? So it is an important and key aspect of the debris screening and debris management.
Absolutely, and it does remind me of when we were assisting NASA in tracking the shuttle debris when the shuttle had the accident over Texas. They were very, very concerned about being able to locate, geolocate, and identify any human remains as part of that. Very, very serious thing. I think I got a note about next questions from the phone. Is that?
My name is John Fassel. I am a supervising health physicist with the California Department of Public Health, Radiologic Health Branch. I'd like to speak to the probable radioactive hazards in the debris flow. First, as far as the nuclear power plant isotopes are concerned, you'd have iodine-131, cesium-134, and cesium-137. All the iodine would have decayed away long before now. Cesium-134 has a half-life of around 2 years, and cesium-137 around 30 years. However, both cesium isotopes are extremely soluble. They would dissolve in the seawater such that it would be very unlikely those would be found in the debris patch. However, when the tsunami came in and went out again, it will drag a number of the other possible radioactive sources that would be scattered around that several hundred square mile area. Thing is, with those sources, many of the high power radioactive sources will be shielded with lead or tungsten, or even uranium is used as a shielding thing. Anything shielded like that doesn't tend to float too terribly well. Make really good anchors, though. But there are some other things. You might find some radium dials, are a common thing with the old military equipment, and there are some other civilian uses as well. So there is a possibility of radioactive things, but it would be scattered throughout the debris. One of the hazards that you might encounter, some of these things, if they do happen to float across, when they do land on California shores, there are areas of California shores which have significantly higher radiation background than what we're used to. Very few of these areas. There's one south of Santa Cruz, and there's another one around Oxnard. But when you have people of the fire departments that go out, and they probably haven't responded to beaches that are, where the beaches themselves may be radioactive. So what you might find is that the fire department responding could go, wow, this is hot, and set off a greater public reaction than you're originally planning. So what I would ask of the federal authorities is that they consider developing a good coherent message on just what the radioactive possibilities really are. Probably not too great, but you do want to address that there are some small possibilities, because one of the greatest concerns of the public is the radioactive hazard. Never mind the other hazmat hazards are probably far higher, but you do have to address that concern of the public, because radiation is the word that makes the public jump out of their skins faster than anything else.
No, I think that's a really good point, and I would actually, what I'd like to do is get our health physicists in touch with the radiation health branch folks so that we can, craft a message that passes muster with you guys as well. That would be great.
And thank you for that, because that's what I was going to point out, that a lot of these, orphan sources or sources in industry or sources in medicine, they may be part of the debris, or any number of things that got contaminated by things in our daily lives, such as radioactive Kleenex boxes you heard about in the news, and more recently the radioactive hotel bed sheets we were discussing today. So any of these things may have a radioactive signal. They may not be toxic, but they will require caution. And so it really gets to Don and Nick Vent's points about how to, and Rich's points about how to assess a scene. And it really comes down, again, to the local fire hazmat folks who would respond to a scene to check out what's there, just like they would any abandoned waste, in their community. The only difference here is the waste is coming from someplace else. And again, I really don't believe that the Fukushima Daiichi disaster had a big impact on contaminating the debris. And I get that from a lot of our health physicists at EPA and other places. But I do believe that, just like with any hazmat, there may be not only radiation but other hazmat associated with debris. And these different debris missions we've been on just go to show that. San Bruno, for one, I know Cal EPA did household hazardous waste cleanup there. Hurricane Katrina, we chased all sorts of different stuff around, some of which may have been floatable. In fact, they did an offshore debris mission. The Coast Guard led it after Katrina. So a lot of debris after Katrina was wrangled up by Coast Guard and other agencies offshore. So it's just, these things have come before. We're just trying to get together in advance of the problem.
I had a note here that we were going to take the next questions from the phone. So if there are folks on the phone that have a question that would like to pose, now is the time. Okay, not hearing anything. Way in the back. Okay. Yeah, we could do that. Yeah, the request was to reach out to the State Department to see if they have been in contact with Japan in terms of disposition of human remains, and we could definitely do that. Actually, I've been wanting to have an excuse to call my Department of State representative on the RRT about something, so this would be an excellent issue for them to follow up on. Evan?
Hi, Eben Schwartz with the Coastal Commission again. Just a few points to follow up on the discussion here. First, I know that subsequent to a series of public meetings that were held in Washington State around the tsunami debris issue that NOAA organized, the Japanese consulate in Washington is setting up a hotline for people to call in if they do find sensitive remains or items that volunteers might want to repatriate. And I believe that the San Francisco consulate, the Japanese consulate in San Francisco may be considering setting up a similar hotline, so just something to keep in mind that this is absolutely on their radar screen as well, and they're very sensitive to the continued impact and fallout from the tsunami debris. Getting to the radioactivity issue, and excuse me if this is an ignorant point because I don't know if this already goes on, but it seems like it might be helpful if there were some baseline radioactivity monitoring going on some of the locations in California at now before the debris hits, so that that can then be compared to whatever levels may show up when the debris does arise, because in all likelihood most of the debris that hits our shores is going to be very small, not necessarily a single item that can be screened, but instead it could just be the baseline of the shoreline itself. So I don't know if that's possible or feasible, but it seems like it might help allay some fears once this stuff starts to hit our shores. And the last point before you respond to that one is that I think this whole discussion we're having, and this has already been touched on, but it just goes to the importance of getting very accurate and coordinated messaging out to the general public very, very soon. I hear from my volunteers all over the state, this is an issue that is already on people's radar screens, and it's only going to become more so. And it absolutely goes to the radioactive waste, human body parts thing first, without a concern about hazardous materials. It's also becoming a significant concern for many of the coastal communities in terms of impacts to tourism. And so the more bad messaging that gets out there, the worse the impacts will be for our coastal economies. So I'm glad we're going to be having that discussion today.
Okay, thanks, Evan. I'm going to take a crack at that first question, but I would also see if our colleagues in the radiation health branch have some thoughts on this, because I think background radiation is very much is somewhat dependent on terrain, and to go out and do some sort of background scanning, I don't know how profitable that would be, particularly because I suspect that anything that washes up that's hot is going to be a discrete source or piece or something, as opposed to a more dispersed sort of elevated level from fallout, if that makes any sense. So we can take that back and talk about it. I'm not sure that that would be a useful use of resources at this point. I think your point about the messaging and explaining to people exactly what we expect to see in the event that something significant did show up makes more sense, so that they're prepared for that.
Thank you. Mark Johnson, Cal EMA Planning Branch. Listening to the conversation, I picked up about 12 different topics that I thought were very important, and when we have people calling in for guidance, it begs the question if there's going to be a central website point of contact where we can refer these people either at the federal level or at the state level that might capture many of these topics we talked about today, and then if they call in, we can refer them to that point.
Yeah, I mean, this is something I think we should follow up on. I know NOAA has a website, a marine debris website. US EPA Region 9 has a marine debris website. It looks like there's the the California Geological Survey, or there's some other websites that maybe we can start putting linking these things together, have one agreed upon frequently asked question or fact sheet that we can point people to, and have each of the websites with a link to the other, so they're all getting sent to the same place or getting access to the same information. I think that would be a useful thing we could follow up on. Maybe FEMA's got a website too. We'll see.
As Jim Calical with FEMA. I have two comments. One of them is that it seems to me that assessment may be a problem because of the lack of funding and resources. However, my question is there an expectation that Hawaii would probably be kind of like can serve as an early warning, even though that they will be going through that, hopefully not a crisis, but going through it? Would there be any way that we can use that information to predict what could happen here in the West Coast?
Well, it's possible. We thought that Midway might be kind of a sentinel location, and that's why we instituted that sort of regular contact with Fish and Wildlife Service up there to see if they're seeing anything unusual on Midway. Well, again, the latest information that we've seen, and again, it's highly uncertain, is that the main debris field may skirt the Hawaiian Island chain to the north and actually start trending more towards Alaska and Washington, Oregon, before it kind of starts circling around in a clockwise direction. But again, highly uncertain at this point.
The other question I have is that the Republic of the Marshall Islands is also associated with the United States through a compact. They also could be a possible area, but again, if you're saying that it's going to be north, maybe you might correct me on my geography, but I think the Marshalls are a little bit west, south of the Hawaiian chain. But is there any indication that they may be hit?
I have not heard the Marshalls mentioned. Maybe Jordan has some thought on that.
I actually, can you hear me okay? I actually have a thought on the previous question about the Northwest Hawaiian Islands. Jordan Stout from NOAA's Office of Response and Restoration again. One of the things that has come out of the cooperative efforts with NOAA and a number of other state and federal agencies out in Hawaii is, and the initial trajectory modeling results was a concern for potential tsunami debris arriving in the Northwest Hawaiian Islands, which is a national monument. and it's remotely populated, or very few number of people out there. There's a lot of particularly natural resource concerns that the Fish and Wildlife Service and NOAA would have, particularly coral reef atolls and such. So there's a lot of concern about what the potential impacts of tsunami-generated debris might be for those areas, and they do have a draft assessment and response framework for not only setting up an initial monitoring of those areas before debris is expected to arrive, but also to try to see how to characterize the debris that does start showing up, and whether or not they can characterize it as link it back to the tsunami itself, and also what do these agencies work together to try to accomplish as far as a response is concerned. So right now it's a draft framework. They're certainly it's going to be essentially a living document until they start really kind of get their feet under them as far as this potential event unfolds, and then certainly that could be used as a template for other communities and shorelines downstream, if you will. As far as I'm concerned or as far as I've heard about the Marshall Islands, I have not heard of those being in the direct path. They might be more likely to be impacted, 4 or 5 years down the road once stuff starts swirling through the Pacific Basin, if there's even any significant debris at that point.
Okay, well maybe we can move to the messaging piece of the agenda, and for that I think was California going to kind of lead that one, or how is that going to work?
Don Johnson with Cal EPA again. Well, I think basically we've been talking about the messaging at this point. So we had some other items on the agenda. I don't know if we're going to follow up. Is there any more discussion on a response plan? Did you have any more on your response plan, or?
Nothing. I don't think much more, other than I think Bill's point about taking the Hawaiian plan and the Hawaii plan and bringing that back, and maybe there are some ideas that California could use as the state kind of starts talking to the local agencies here. There might be some useful information there, and we'll do that.
Okay. Well, I think as far as messaging, I don't think that we're far enough along at the moment to decide what that message is going to be. I think we're at a point where we realize we have to have a message and put it together. And it's what I would offer at this point, kind of as wrap up. Stephen Sellers mentioned development of a ConOps, and part of that would be Cal EPA and the California Department of Public Health working together to maybe form a mini multi-agency coordination group. We can bring in local government, coastal folks to participate in that, and through that start outlining some of these questions, answering some of these questions we have, specifically give some guidance to the local response teams on how to screen these materials and what they should respond to, maybe something to the public on what things would be unusual that they should report. Obviously there's going to be obvious things like drums and paint containers or closed containers that look like chemical containers that would be reported, but as far as the smaller items, I think we need to probably do a little bit more work so we can reassure people that we're not dealing with a radioactive material, so we don't have people running out there every day on that. So I would say at this point, unless somebody has a clearer idea on what that messaging would be, I think we're going to have to walk out of here with the idea that we're going to have to form this group, and we're going to have to be doing some more work with US EPA to kind of nail this stuff down and get the message done. So I like the idea of a web page. Cal EPA has a emergency response web page, and we can work with Cal EMA on maybe doing something that links up and puts all the common information on that. So we can do that as well.
I think that's good, Don. And I would also again say that I think that NOAA has developed a set of frequently asked questions that may be a starting point in terms of message development that we can make available.
If the folks in California, the communities in California are starting to ask a number of questions that are not already on our website, it's relatively easy for us to post those types of questions and try to get some consensus answers to those types of things. So it's a ready-made vehicle to try to get some of those messages out. And I have the website here. I can provide it to whoever needs it.
And that's great. My name is Kelly Houston. I'm with the California Emergency Management Agency, and I'm part of the Crisis Communications Division. Deborah Hoffman is with Cal EPA, and she's also in the Communications Division. We've gone through and looked at a lot of the stuff that's out there. So from the federal government side to individual agencies to basically the whole gamut of stuff. So there's a lot of information available now. So what we are going to do in our group here, and anybody who wants to be a part of this is welcome to, is to really sort of look at what is the public most concerned with, whether it's the radioactivity or whether they think a body is going to wash on shore or something to that effect, and try to answer the questions that the public's most worried about first, and then provide what we would believe to be the most relevant links for folks to then get deeper into that information to find out what's going on. Because what's happening right now is that people are just not familiar with it, and when they go online, they don't really know which site we're supposed to, is this the right one or is that the right one? And so us pulling it together, at least in sort of a top-level public messaging area, is probably our first concern. Because, what's reported on some of these sites as far as the data and the facts is very relevant to us in the first responder and local and state agency communities, but when it comes to what the public is concerned about, that's a whole different story, and that's where we sort of focus our energy, at least in the first part, because we obviously, some of you have brought this up, is that we don't want that fear, bad information, or a vacuum for folks to kind of fill in the gap. We saw that when this actually first happened, where we had people that were coming into the forefront and getting on CNN and talking about stuff, and they didn't know what they were talking about, but they had really good sound bites, and people thought they knew what they were talking about.
And I think just to follow up with what Kelly was saying is, and somebody brought it up here too, is getting that message out sooner rather than later, so that we don't have, some rogue mayor or some TV station or whatever it may be, some talk show person, kind of sending the wrong message and scaring folks. And if that message gets out too early, that negative message, that fear tactics, if you will. I mean, it sells papers. People are interested in that kind of stuff. So we have to make sure we get our message out early. And I think there's a lot of good information that we have in this room, and we just need to kind of put it all together and get that message out.
Did anybody have any questions about that before we?
Just a suggestion, and this is something that all of us are in response sort of really well vetted in, and that is, before you go out with anything, make sure you have your protocol together. When a 911 call comes in saying, I found something, what's that dispatch going to say? And it behoove, I know Don's on this, but what do you want your identification protocol to be? Who's going to call whom? So that there isn't this fumbling and bumbling and then you get a bad rep because you're not prepared. Have that set up when you start doing it. Be a good idea.
That's a very good point. So it's sort of, we're running in parallel tracks. The public messaging is in one track, and then we have what's working in the operational level and with the counties that are affected by this. And I know we've already received some questions from some of the coastal counties asking, what do we do? Who do we call? How do we treat? All the sort of questions that have been asked in this forum. And so it all integrates together. Do you want to go ahead?
I just want to second what the point that was just made about having a protocol ready, because there's stuff from Japan washing up on California shores all the time. There's just a lot of garbage out in the ocean, and as this issue gets more attention, people are going to be finding it more and more because they'll be looking for it, and anything with Japanese writing on it is going to instantly be from the tsunami. So it is going to be important to have that protocol down and a response ready. And I'm not sure if there's a communications plan in the works yet or what your typical system may be, but public meetings on this in coastal communities up and down California would probably be very helpful. It would increase media attention and would get the folks who are most concerned into the room to hear the accurate information.
We might consider doing what we're doing right now, and this is, we're doing a live webcast using basically social media. It's called Ustream. It's free. We just embedded it on our webpage because we're obviously talking within the first responder and local government, state, federal government community, but we may consider doing one of these that's more public and pushing out, doing a talkback where people can ask questions and get the information from whoever the select experts are, but the focus of that audience is the general public. So you sort of not be so technical. You have another question? Oh, here, let me run this over there.
Kevin Miller, lead for the Cal EMA Tsunami program. I would just point out again that the Tohoku anniversary is about 3 weeks away, and I can see this as a parallel story that's going to be focused on. And we attended, Rick and I attended a NOAA briefing last week of the National Tsunami Hazard Mitigation Program, and two kind of pieces of information that came out of that I drew from that I didn't see come out today was the focus on the 25 million tons of debris is a little bit of, it could be hype, and there was concern about that because that's on-land debris that didn't necessarily wash into the ocean, and a lot of that, you know, what did wash in sunk, and so it's just a basic unknown. So throwing around a figure like 25 million tons starts to raise the bar already. So that's something to help downplay things. And the other point was that just to stress again that anything with Japanese writing, like you said, that washes up is not necessarily from the tsunami. And their calculations were that this material, the lightest material blown across the ocean by currents and wind, could travel at a max 20 miles a day. That's, you know, you can do the math and see that it's not at all possible for that material to be from this event at this point.
If I can jump in here, the gentleman brought up the issue of Japanese writing, but I don't know about you guys, but you know the difference between Chinese, Japanese, and Korean, and they also have shipping extensively in the West Coast, so that's something to think about with messaging as well.
I just wanted to state along the lines of communication that NOAA and EPA put out a monthly tsunami marine debris bulletin just for the public to understand what the federal government, and particularly what NOAA and EPA are currently working on with regard to the tsunami debris. So on our website, we have a listserv sign-up opportunity for anyone who wants to get that monthly bulletin delivered to them. So it's not a talking point messaging system per se, but it is an update on a monthly basis.
And that's great. We will probably be able to sort of steal from that, you know, and so it's all consistent messaging, and that's great to hear. Are there any other questions?
So, Rich Martin, and just a commercial break here for a minute. I want you, I know you all know this, one of the foremost hazardous materials trainings in the United States is right here in Sacramento every year. It's called the Continuing Challenge. It's our 23rd year, and this year we're going to have a lot of radiation training and a lot of first responder training in every field of the hazmat scene. So lots of training. We're taking offers for teachers to teach this year, and so our website is hazmat.org. So come and do a class on this, all right? We had over 800 people last year. We put on about 100 classes in 4 days. It's a great venue.
John Kennedy. Well, Shelley just wanted me to mention first that apparently there are YouTube videos already up on this, and that's something to be aware of, and so the need for communicating messaging is high now, apparently. On the operational side, Bill's suggestion about a protocol, maybe we're not here to appoint leads and assign tasks today, but I'm just wondering, that'll take some work, identifying agencies' roles, their lead responsibilities, key contact information, and this is response coordination, something we do in CARPA. And so I was just wondering, would that fall into the FEMA CONOPS plan, or is that something the MAC would work out when it meets in the future?
Well, I'm making this up right now. But once we get together with Cal EMA, and I think it will be part of the multi-agency coordination group, and we'll divide up out of that group some responsibilities to do some of these tasks once we know what all those tasks are. So I've got kind of a rough list now, but so I'm coming away with more homework than answers at this point.
But yeah, I would just interject. I think it makes a lot of sense for Cal EMA, Cal EPA, US EPA, NOAA, anyone else, maybe the California Survey, the tsunami folks, to form a small group in terms of, as part of that state CONOPS, to have the messaging piece. We definitely want to work on that, and I think there's a lot that's already been done that can just be pulled together.
Okay, just in the back here, real quick, I'm kind of taking us back just slightly to address another online question from Nick in San Diego County, and he's just curious if there is some sort of timeline for guidance documents for folks down at the local level there.
I'm going to punt that to Don.
Nick, as soon as Nick prepares them, we'll have them. So Nick might be part of the multi-agency coordination group, and will be invited to work with us on this. So no, we do not have a timeline yet, but it's soon.
Why don't we, even for a planning process, a unified command by that group, break the state into the 3 regions in which it's going to be impacted, regions 2, 1, and 6. And depending on what happens with any of the inland coastal, if it gets in that far, break those 20 counties into those 3 branches. So then they're in their geographical areas politically and operationally that need to happen. Break things down from cities, counties, special districts, our state and federal partners, and our tribal entities in that format as you guys put things together. In that way, it'll set the basis for the planning side of the house, and then when you hit the actual response issues that will need to take place at that point, and I think everything would probably come together, at least from my standpoint, and also take care of any of the jurisdictions and the operational financial issues that will come with them.
Thanks, Kim. That's a real good idea. Any other questions? All right. Well, again, thank you very much for the venue and the opportunity. I thought it was a great discussion. I'm hoping that one of my team has taken notes, since I don't know if I remembered all those things I'm supposed to be doing now. But Anna Marie's she's got plenty of work now. So, but again, thank you very much, Tina and Steve and everybody else at Cal EMA. Really appreciate it. Thanks a lot.